They are hero stories because each laid down their life for a righteous cause. Laid down their life for people they did not know and never met. The fallen are made holy by their sacrifice, and the earth in which they lay cannot be dedicated to be more sacred. And we cannot erase the debt we owe to these men and women of uncommon stature.
In 1924, Frank Nishimura was born in Seattle, Washington, to Ritoji and Kiku Nishimura. Frank was the youngest of 6 children, and the only one with an American name. His other siblings were Toshimi, Shizuko, Hiromi, Yuki, and Toyo. Both his mother and father were good business people and bought and sold hotels. Since Japanese nationals were not permitted to purchase land in Washington state by law, a trusted Jewish attorney purchased the property in his name, but when Toshimi came of age, the title was transferred to him. The family acquired the Puget Sound Hotel on 6th and Dearborn Street and lived on the 5th floor. It was the second largest hotel in town with 444 rooms. Frank attended Cascade and then Bailey Gatzert School. He was in the last 8th grade class that graduated from Bailey Gatzert in 1938. In the fall, he started classes at Broadway High School, which is now Seattle Central College. In the summer, Frank drove his friends to the beach and parks for climbing and picnicking. In the winter, they skied Snoqualmie and Mount Rainier. Frank's teen years were carefree and fun.
The 100th Battalion and the Military Intelligence Service. If you're here today, please raise your hand or stand.
All that changed on December 7, 1941.
On December 7th, 1941, Shorty, a couple of friends, and I went up to Mount Rainier for winter skiing. Shorty turned on the radio. When the static cleared, we heard that the Japanese had bombed Pearl Harbor.
From the NBC newsroom in New York, President Roosevelt said in a statement today that the Japanese have attacked the Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, from the air. I'll repeat that. President Roosevelt says that the
Shorty hollered.
Holy cow. This is war.
I was angry because they attacked my country. I remembered what Miss Malin, principal of Bailey Gatzert, had always told us about being proud Americans. It felt like 1,000 eyes were watching us on the way home. Everyone was relieved to return to the security of Japantown. I ran up 5 floors to our family room. Mother said,
"Did you hear the news?"
There was a look of shock on the faces of my mother, father, and older brother as they huddled around the Motorola radio. Dad said,
There's going to be war with Japan.
In grade school, Miss Mann always reminded us that we were American citizens. But I worried because my parents were Japanese citizens and could not become naturalized U.S. citizens by law.
Remember, Frank, you are an American.
Right after Pearl Harbor, Japanese community leaders were taken by the FBI. The community did not know where the people were detained or how long they would be gone. Rinban Suzuki, the Buddhist priest, leaders of the Japanese Gold Club, and others were taken. Japanese families lived in fear about what would happen next. The tension in the community rose when all Japanese and Japanese Americans were ordered to turn in shortwave radios, cameras, and weapons to the Seattle Police Department. Many burned their Japanese books, family photographs, and anything that showed a connection to Japan. Shorty was afraid they would keep his ham radio, so he asked if I could hide it. I said, okay. We buried it under a canvas tarp and piles of old suitcases in the basement. We were sure no one would find it. FBI men drove up in their black sedan. They wore fedora hats, suits, and shiny shoes. I thought they were going to take my father away, but instead they wanted to talk to me. I felt the blood drain from my face and gulped when they said,
Ham radio.
I was shaking as I walked them to the basement. All that time, I was hoping I wouldn't go to prison. Toshimi, my older brother, yelled at me for being so careless.
How could you be so careless?
He said that we should lay low and not draw attention to ourselves.
What would happen if they come
Anxiously, we waited every day for a week to see if the FBI would return. Luckily, they didn't. After this incident, Dad knew things would get worse. Dad and Toshimi talked after dinner about what might happen next.
Would they take Japanese citizens? What would become of the children?
Who would run the hotel, and how much cash should we set aside if our assets are frozen?
The piers were off limits to Japanese, and on December 8th, I lost my delivery job with a PI newspaper. A policeman saw us at the waterfront and told us to leave and not come back. We were unable to say goodbye to our customers, or even get paid.
The larger problem, the uncertainty of what would happen among these people in case of a Japanese invasion, still remained. That is why the commanding general of the Western Defense Command determined that all Japanese within the coastal area should move inland.
In April 1942, the government issued the orders for all Japanese aliens and non-aliens within 150 miles from the coast to be forcibly incarcerated within a week. Flyers were posted on telephone poles all over Japantown. Many Japanese were selling or storing their possessions as they packed what they could carry. Dad leased the hotel to Mr. Wu, a Chinese business friend. Then he rented a large Mayflower moving trailer and truck. Our destination was Meade, Washington, near Spokane, where Toshimi leased 100 acres of land. 2 other families joined us, and we headed east over the mountains beyond the 150-mile exclusion zone. The 3 families pitched a tent, and we began building a house, stringing electrical wire, and constructing an outhouse. We pumped water up from the river for bathing and irrigating our garden. After a few months, the rest of my siblings relocated elsewhere away from Meade, leaving me alone with Mom and Dad. Dad insisted that we could live near Spokane away from potentially unfriendly neighbors. Japantown was empty, and all the Japanese were in the temporary incarceration center on the Puyallup Fairgrounds under the guard of the army. The soldiers took everyone, the very old, orphans, healthy adults, and children. We bought 2 horses to haul wood, plow fields, and harvest hay. But it turned out they were racehorses and ran away. Hey, come back here! We spent the whole day rounding them up and returning them to the farmer, their former owner. I was used to the city life with friends, picnics, dances, churches, Chinese restaurants, and Japanese Fudo bathhouses. I knew that the Japantown life was gone, but I felt isolated and missed my friends. My cousin in Spokane said that the U.S. Army was accepting Japanese American volunteers. I had images of going to Europe and seeing the places I had only imagined. I was afraid of what my parents would say, but I volunteered for the Army anyway and just needed to pass the physical. Dad worried I might be sent to fight against Japan. Also, he was concerned about losing the son who drove them to town for groceries. Eventually, after I left, both of my parents moved into a proper house with running water and indoor plumbing in Post Falls, Idaho. Because the train to Mississippi was full and all the seats were taken, I sat on the train stairwell for the whole trip and watched the countryside go by. Because the 100th Infantry Battalion from Hawaii was suffering heavy casualties at Monte Cassino, the sergeant asked if anyone would volunteer to be a replacement. I raised my hand, as did about 5 others. The Hawaiian boys knew we volunteered, so they treated us well. Because I was the youngest, they called me Junior, which came out to be Junya in Pidgin English. Private Mutz, a dark and wiry fellow, became my buddy and protector. He wore his cap crooked on purpose and always wore shorts in the barracks. Mutz would say,
"Hey Junior, I teach you play pool today."
Over the weeks, I learned about rifles, grenades, basic first aid, poker, craps, ukuleles, fish, hula, and poi. After basic training, we shipped out and zigzagged across the Atlantic to avoid the German subs. There were 400 of us on a Liberty ship, which is really an old rust bucket freighter. We were assigned to the cargo hold, stacked with bunks 5 to 6 high. I'll take the top one. At first the troops were eager, but their enthusiasm didn't last as we began to rock and roll in the Atlantic for weeks. Most got seasick. This went on for about a month until we reached Italy. Even though the Hawaii boys were tanned, many of them looked pale or green the entire trip. When we landed, I was assigned as a radio man. The radio was a large pack with an antenna that weighed almost as much as I did. Plus, I had my rifle, plus ammo, canteen, and gear. Usually the biggest guy carried the radio. Immediately, I thought this was my punishment for hiding Shorty's ham radio in Seattle. At Anzio, I was assigned to Company B. There was a fellow named Curtis who had a Chinese girlfriend back home. His parents objected because she was not Japanese, but he wanted to marry her and asked for our advice. We told him to follow his heart. He was happy and wrote a letter telling her he wanted to marry her when he got home. The next day, near the Mussolini Canal battle, the ground was shaking from our artillery fire. Curtis took a peek and caught a bullet between the eyes. It was sad to see his life and dreams disappear so quickly. Later, I met Yoshito from Seattle, and we shared a foxhole. We talked about good times growing up. To my surprise, he had dated my sister. I was shocked and amazed. "You dated my sister?" I asked. After that, he became like a brother to me. Yoshito was the best point man, and everyone followed him single file through the terrain and forest. Being up front was the most dangerous assignment. He was so good at sneaking up on the enemy that he earned the nickname, the Shadow. Sadly, fate caught up to Yoshito when a sniper's bullet killed him. I heard, "Shadow's down." By the time I reached him, someone had already covered his body with a poncho. I didn't have a chance to say a last goodbye.